Welcome to the Business as Mission podcast, dedicated to those who long to see God glorified in business and the nations reached for Christ. Your host is Mike Baer, longtime BAM leader and founder of Third Path Initiative, an online education resource for starting and growing BAM businesses around the world.
Welcome to another episode of the Business as Mission podcast. This is Mike Baer, and I'm back on with my good friend, Larry Sharp, from the Pacific Northwest, and we were just catching up before the podcast about dogs and daughters and freezing temperatures in Canada and all kinds of things. But Larry's been on the podcast. Is this your fourth time, Larry, I think?
I was thinking third, but I'm really not sure.
Well, third or fourth. I think this might be the fourth one, but anyway, It's good to have you back. We'll see. We'll count them up, but it's good to have you back. Larry and I met years ago in Philadelphia when they were starting Business as Mission with Crossworld, and that later birthed IBEC Ventures, which is where Larry has been, along with the other 30,000 things he does. So anyway, it's great to see you, Larry. Welcome back.
Thanks, Mike. It's always good to be with you as well. And I well remember that first time we met in a restaurant at the airport. You were passing through, and Jim introduced us, and I've been blessed ever since.
Well, and me too. That was a long time ago.
Sure.
I think we were all just starting to figure out what this thing was. And
I think that was 2005, and you were considered the guru at that time. You'd been there, done that, and were able to articulate what was going on. And it was immature in some ways, but I appreciate your leadership.
Well, that's the story of my life. I'd say I'm often wrong, but never silent.
Very good.
So Larry and I were talking a while back. We talk regularly. He and I work together an alliance called Venture, which is putting together BAM training, BAM coaching, and BAM financing for startups and scale-ups around the world. But we've known each other for a long time. We were chatting the other day, and that's, was asking you to come back on the podcast and just to sort of pitch ideas around, not so much to interview him, but for us to talk through some different things. We laid out some different questions we might go around and just see where it leads us. And so this is I want you to imagine Larry and me at a coffee shop, just enjoying each other's fellowship and talking about BAM. So Larry, anything you want to say to kick us off?
Well, we've got some good Northwest coffee here. You should come and see us sometime.
I need to get back up there. I haven't been up there in probably 7 years, maybe 8 years or so. I need to get back up there.
You did some consulting here, I think, right?
I actually worked for a company that had offices there.
Okay.
Yeah, just they had 500 offices around the country, and that was one of their markets. So yeah,
I appreciate being on here again, Mike. I'm well past retirement age, as you know, and I'm still able to do a few things and keep touch with people like yourself. And it's just a real blessing to see how God brought this BAM movement along the way. And it certainly is expanding, and there's challenges before us, but with the Lord's help, we're going to see some real changes.
So I'm just curious. I'm not going to ask you how old you are, but what is retirement age anyway? I retired 5 years ago, and I'm still working full time.
But by retirement age, I'm at 66, which is the age in the States here where you receive retirement Social Security benefits.
Yeah,
I'm 14 years past that.
I gotta say you are certainly not retired.
No, I just tell people I'm tired. I'm not retired.
Exactly. So Larry, here's some of the things we said we wanted to chat about. We'll just see where it takes us. We don't finish all of them. We'll just have to do another one. But we were talking about just in general. What are you seeing as what are we seeing really as some of the hurdles and challenges within the BAM movement at this point in time? As you say, it's been around, there were pioneers out doing it in the late 80s, early 90s. It didn't really start becoming a current day movement until probably early 2000s, a lot to the leadership of Mats Tunag and the folks at BAM Global, but certainly now it is. So at the very least, it's been around for 30 years in the modern movement, and just God's doing amazing things. What do you see as some of the biggest hurdles? I mean, it has grown. It's literally in every part of the world, but let's just talk about what we see as as the struggles maybe that it's going to be facing?
To me, one of the big hurdles is I really don't think that the Christian church world really understands the whole idea of business as mission. And now I'm not discouraged because I do see hope. I do see some progress forward, but there's a failure to see, in my view, and understand the history of Christian witness. For example, in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, it talks about we are to be his witnesses. But over time, and especially the 20th century, we have professionalized the kingdom work, professional missionaries, and we have, I kind of sense that there's some maybe professional jealousy in the church, and that the clergy kind of hold tight almost in the same way it did in pre-Reformation time, and that there is no place for the common Christian to bring the gospel to the world. And so that, to me, that's a hurdle, and there's a lot of implications to that. There's a lot of ways to think about that. But to me, if you're using the word hurdle or challenge, it's difficult to move forward with the bad movement if the leadership of the church, if the seminaries, and the kind of the hierarchy of our evangelical world does not really want to understand it.
I agree with you. When I look at this, and I'm starting to think about things like the ministry as a career path, versus it's not a career path, and I had nothing against paid pastors. I was one. Nothing against financially supported missionaries, but you're right. It leaves everybody else sort of as feeling like either you're a spectator or a financier, but there's not really a place for you. And that to me has been what I discovered, frankly, by accident in the early 90s when I went to Kyrgyzstan. It's just that as a professional business person and an open follower of Jesus, I could go anywhere, and I was welcome. I didn't have visa issues. I didn't have security issues. I had to be thoughtful about how I communicated the gospel in a Muslim country, but it was never anything like what has happened since then. I'm thinking about a couple of thoughts. One is you've probably heard me say this before. When I was at Dallas Seminary, Howard Hendricks used to talk a lot about this, that he said missions and the ministry are a lot like football. And of course, he meant American football, among other things. By the way, he was the chaplain for the Dallas Cowboys back in the Tom Landry era. But when I knew him, he said, "Yeah, it's a lot like football." We always say, "Well, what do you mean, Ross?" Because he wanted me to ask, and so we go, "Well, explain that." And he said, "Well, it's 22 men on the field in desperate need of rest." And 80,000 people in the stands, desperate need of exercise.
That's right.
And I've always thought that's a perfect example of what we see. Pastors talk about being overworked, and yet they're not really equipping the masses to do real ministry, real service for Christ, other than Sunday school or and again, not being critical. They're following. You said they're following the pattern they learned in seminary. They're following the pattern that's been around for 150 years, maybe longer. It's almost like a new Romanism, in a way. I was thinking about this. I'll put this back in and see if this makes any sense. So I always have believed that Martin Luther just rediscovered two critical doctrines that led to the Reformation. The first one, we all know exactly what it was, and that was the doctrine of justification by faith apart from works. And that's what started the Reformation. That's what led to the breach with the Roman Church. That's what has set the whole Protestant movement in motion for the last, what now, Larry, 600 years. And so I look at that and I'm like, okay, that's great. But there was another doctrine he rediscovered that either he forgot or it didn't save to his hard drive or something. But he did teach on it. Was the doctrine of the priesthood of all believers, and then that it wasn't just the priest; it was everybody was a priest, and then that was lost. And I kind of feel like that's part of what's at the heart of the business as mission movement is the rediscovery of, hey, we all have a part to play. We all have a ministry. We're gifted and called and need to be on the football field.
Yeah, in the book that Matt Stunahug put out along with G.F. Gord, she has a quote there that I appreciated, and she says, 500 years ago, we had the reformation of dogma, but now we have the reformation of mission. So, and by that, she's meaning that we have seriously deviated from the way the early church in the first century understood how the gospel spread. But for me, a good example of that is Acts chapter 8, where Stephen had been persecuted, or stoned rather, and the Christians were persecuted. And it says they left Jerusalem. And then it says all the apostles stayed there. Now, I really believe in the clergy class. I believe we need pastors. We need theologians. We need professors, and things like that. And that is a viable ministry of God. But the gospel spread by those persecuted Christians who went all up the eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean, across Asia Minor, Turkey, over to Cyprus. And by the time you get to chapter 17 in Acts, they're over in northern Greece, in Thessalonica. And that's 1,000 miles from Jerusalem. And you have churches spreading out, and little churches, some bigger, that were established because these Christians just went everywhere and talked about Jesus. Now, no First Baptist Church in Jerusalem, no money flowing over there, no seminary graduates, and they didn't even have a Bible. And yet, it's not, the Apostle Paul and the great leaders that we think about in the first, second century, they came along after, and they helped to provide good, solid doctrine for these churches. They encouraged these churches. They visited them. They shared news. All that was great, but the churches began through the everyday professional person, so that if you were a bricklayer in Jerusalem and you had 3 little kids over in Cyprus, all of a sudden, as a persecuted Christian, guess what you did? You found a job as a bricklayer, and so on and so forth. And to me,
what were you going to talk
model.
about? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, what would you talk about? Have you witnessed the resurrection and all of
that? Yeah, and pretty soon, well, I believe the 21st century will be just like should be and will be like the first century, not like the 20th century. For me, the 20th century was an aberration. We had the tremendous advantages of, after the Second World War, we could go everywhere. And the church fantastically took advantage of that. And we went to all the places that are not open to the missionary world today. You can't be a missionary in 2/3 of the world in terms of population. And you can't get a visa. You can't get what they call a religious workers visa. But they're not closed. I don't like to use that word closed. You can go there with a wide range of professions and create value in the community and be appreciated there because of what you bring in business, and all the while look for open doors to share your faith as there's opportunity.
I remember, Larry, in the very early days of the sort of mid-1990s, I was trying to gain access or trying to get welcomed into a village in Kazakhstan. And the village elders, and it was a decent-sized little town, but the village elders, they said, well, give us your we were meeting in Almaty, and they said, give us your website. Well, I had a real company, right? A real consulting firm called the Joel Dodge Group, still going. My business partner still runs it. And, we're looking at this and thinking, what are they going to see? Well, we didn't ever put anything Christian on the website because we just said, this is our business. This is who we are. And they contacted us and says, well, we've checked out your website. You're for real. You can come. And of course, it wasn't fake. It was real. That we thought that was really kind of cool that God would use real business to do that. I'm sort of thinking about going back to your Acts references, and one of the translations, very loose translation of Acts chapter 8, 1 and 2, talks about the persecuted Christians scattered, and they went everywhere. But this is an interesting word. They went everywhere gossiping the gospel. And they weren't doing pulpit preaching. They were just talking about what they knew. They were talking about who they knew. They were talking about what they'd experienced. And I've seen that. I've seen that in real life. I saw that in Kyrgyzstan, where we were helping people start businesses there, and it was all business guys doing this. It was all volunteer time. We'd go and just serve the very early fledgling church there. And this one guy, and we started seeing this happen all the time, but this one guy took his business to another village to start his business there. There were no Christians in that village. Well, pretty soon he's starting to meet people through his business. He's talking about, like the early church, he's talking about what he knew, who he knew, and people are starting to believe, and then people that believe start gathering, and that's really the church, right? I mean, that's how it happens. And so I get looked at sideways for this, but I think I'm right. I don't believe the Great Commission is to plant churches. I believe the Great Commission is to make disciples. But when you make disciples, what do? They gather. What is a gathering of saints?
Right. That's right.
It's a church. And so I think that's another thing that has maybe contributed a little bit to the professional classism that we're dealing with, is that we've reinterpreted the Great Commission to mean something other than life on life discipleship. And so not everybody's qualified to start a church.
Right.
But they are qualified to make disciples.
The church is the end result. There's a guy by the name of Kawasaki, who was a VP at Apple, and he has a great TED Talk where he talks about, for entrepreneurs to think about this particular concept: make meaning, not money. So money is a byproduct of a meaningful business. Now take that same concept into our Christian thinking, is that let's not focus on the end. Let's talk about how we get there. And that's what Jesus did. And if the broader kind of perspective on that is that I go so far as to say, no, if you quote me on this, I'll have to deny I said it. But the great commandment is equally important as the Great Commission, because as you see Jesus' stories walking through his life on earth, he cared about the human condition, and to him, love was healing this person. Love was feeding the 5,000. Love was turning water into wine. Love was calming the storm. Love was dealing with the human condition. And as he did that, it opened up a spiritual conversation, and he went from one to the other. Now, why should we be doing anything different? And I love fiery preachers, and we need those guys. But the gospel is going to penetrate the people in my building here, where there's 120 workspaces, by me living like Jesus here. They're not going to go to church. They're not going to turn on a Christian radio broadcast. But if they see a believer living like Jesus differently, that opens up a conversation. And I think that's something we've lost. I know after in the 1950s, when I grew up in the 60s, there was an urgency to get the gospel out. And we kind of just put on a back burner, quote unquote, the social gospel. Well, it wasn't the social gospel. It was just care for human need, and for people who it was a door and a to the gospel being proclaimed because it's first incarnated in the community.
We'll be right back after a short break. If your business or ministry would like to sponsor the Business as Mission podcast, simply email info@thirdpathinitiative.com, and we'll set up a conversation about your needs and goals.
I was thinking about it. Maybe 20, 25 years ago, I was in, again, another example of what we're talking about. I was in Indonesia, and I remember asking an Indonesian brother, I said, who got here first? Let me set the stage with this. Indonesia is the largest Muslim country on the planet.
Right.
240 million people, probably more than that now. That's a dated number, but let's say 240 million people, 96% of which are Muslim. And so that's huge number. And I asked this guy, I said, look, who got here first? The Christians, missionaries, or the Muslims? Because I was curious about the history, because the Christian missionaries got here first. They came with a Dutch East India Company on board their ships, and they were here first. I said, okay, so if they got here first, why in the world is Islam 96% of the population here? Why isn't Christianity? And he said, oh, that's easy. He said, what happened was the Dutch missionaries came and they didn't want to live among us. So they would build their own compound, their own sort of gated community. And then they would go out of that into the rest of the country and they would preach and teach and then they'd come back in. But he said, the difference, he said, that wasn't very effective, which you and I would agree with. But so what the Muslims did is, he said, they came here to open shops. They came here to make furniture. They came here to sell things. They came here to buy things. They came here to farm. He said they lived among us. And so we saw their faith. We saw their religion and we adopted it. And I think that's, to me, that's quite an indictment against the mission strategy that said, go and don't live among them, live near them. Versus live.
Right. No, that's a great story. And I think that is so, it tells it so cogently that every seminary, every pastor, everybody in so-called ministry should memorize that story and understand it thoroughly, because it's what's, we're talking about overcoming things or hurdles. Now, I'm not critical of the mission strategies of the late 20th century, because I don't think it's profitable. But I do think the 21st century has to be different. God used missionaries for the last 100 years in the way that we know and we can describe it. But why are we replicating that in the 21st century when the world has changed so radically?
Everything's changed. Absolutely right. Everything's changed. I mean, think about the places you want to go. You can't go to Afghanistan as a missionary. You can pretend you're something else. That's the current adaptation of strategy. Let's pretend we're something else, but you really can't. And that's just one example. You can't go to Iran. You can't go to Saudi Arabia. You can't go to many places in North Africa. You can't go to many places in Southeast Asia. But as a business person, you and I right now can go anywhere in the world as long as it, and this is my pet peeve, and I don't think we've overcome this yet. And I'm like you. I don't want to be critical. It might sound like we are, but we're not. We love the mission movement. We love what's going on in the world. We love the people that you were a missionary, traditional missionary. I was a traditional pastor. So I'm not throwing rocks at me, but it's no longer an appropriate strategy. It's no longer a impactful strategy. I left the pastorate for one reason only. I told people, well, I ran away with the pastor's wife. It happened to be my wife. But I actually left because I found that for me, being a pastor was a barrier to sharing the gospel with people, not a bridge. They weren't going to come into the church building. When I met them in various settings outside the church building, they assumed that I would share the gospel because that's my job. And so the Lord literally, and I kid you not, the Lord literally told me to leave the pastorate and go be among lost people and unchurched people in the business community. And that's how it all started for me back in the late 70s and early 80s.
Yeah, I agree. I was vice president at Crossworld, and the president at the time, he just retired. His name was Dale. He said this, which was so profound for me. He said, I spent his whole mission career before he came back to be president of Crossworld in France as a missionary. And there they call them pastors. So he's a pastor, and he gets some respect. But Monday morning comes, and everybody goes off to work at Michelin or wherever, and his car is still in the parking lot, and so he's expected to be priestly. He's expected to play the role of the clergy. He's different. Okay. We have to work for a living, and he said this. He said, "I wish I had gone to France, not as a missionary, but worked in a factory and lived like the people." And just saw what happened when I lived like Jesus. That's pretty profound for a guy who was quite a long time president of a regular Mission Nexus type mission agency, who wishes he'd lived his life differently. And now, in God's sovereignty, it all worked out, and he's
absolutely right.
But the thing is, that's the future. It has to be. I just can't believe in my church and everywhere I go, people are still sending short-term mission trips to Mexico, and that's okay. Mexico needs it like everywhere else, but we never hear of those countries today with millions and millions of people who simply have no gospel. I preached a Sunday morning service in a church in Portland not long ago. And just before I spoke, they came up and they were thanking a mission trip, a group of people who took a mission trip to Italy, and all great. And when I got up, I said, "This is great. I think this is wonderful." But then I spoke, and at the end, I said, "Well, what would it be like if, when people graduated from Portland State as an engineer, people graduated in management from University of Oregon and went to work for Nike? What would that look to bring them up to the platform and dedicate them and pray for them and see them as missional as these people that went to Italy and stood on the street corner and preached and did these things? What would that look like?" And I can tell you, I can see the pastor sitting there, eyes glazing over, but I had a dozen people who came up and talked to me afterwards. And they said, "Where do you get these ideas? How do you think it could work for me?" That kind of a conversation. That's where we have to go. There's no other way. I work with some people that work in North Korea. And, we're saying, well, why do you work there? If you're political, you might say, why are you helping Kim Jong-un? But the point is, there's people that don't know Jesus. And I can go there as a business person because they want to improve their life. And Jesus can be in you as you do your job, creating value for the country and being...
Well, that's the beauty of doing business as a believer overseas, is everywhere you go, Jesus is in you. You're taking him in.
Absolutely.
It's like, let's say, do you have anything to declare? You bring anything with you?
Yeah.
Bring in the Son of God.
Yeah. And there's so many models of people like you, Mike, your experience over there, Bill, Job, lots of other people who have been used of God in a mighty way to be Jesus, and people see that. And so we've got to overcome those hurdles. We've got to keep pressing forward. We're seeing what the Lord's going to do with a new generation. I think, I took three grandkids with me to Southeast Asia, to a country, and we visited several freedom businesses and so on. Anyway, my oldest grandson, he just graduated from Baer with a business degree, working for Oracle. And he said to me the other day, he said, how long should I work for Oracle? Because I want to go out to a foreign country with my business degree and work for a company over there where there's no way missionaries can get in. I said, well, you don't get too, you probably should spend 2 or 3 years at Oracle first and, get some more experience. But he's got a heart for the nation. And it's not going to be the same pathway as Grandpa. He gets it. And my goal is that hundreds and thousands of others will get it and understand that.
Absolutely. You think about and I can understand. And it's funny. We made a list of 5 topics. We're going to talk about the one. So we will definitely do this again.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get on to something else.
I just want to kind of camp on this just 1 second, and then we'll really we'll wrap up the podcast and we'll do this again. But I think about the church and why the organized church has such a tendency to look sideways at business's mission. And some of it, theologically, they're not getting it. They're not getting it in seminary. They're not getting the integrated, what I call seamless integration of business as mission, right? You have one life. You don't have 2 lives. You don't have your business life, your Christian life. You have a life. And it's just not being taught, or at least not being talked about very much. And then there's also these are my members. Where are you going to take them? Like, what? They're not your members. I know I felt that way, but they're not. They weren't mine. They're his. They're the people of God. And then the other thing that to me always kicks in, and I hate to say this way, Larry, I think a lot of it's about money. If they get involved in other things, I've watched business people, myself included, direct more and more of my wealth, if I can use that word, toward international work, toward international investment, toward international, paying my own ways to conferences in fourth world countries. I mean, that's what we do. It's just your heart goes first, your treasure follows. And I think there's a little bit of a fear, maybe not fear, maybe just a concern that, how are we going to pay the bills if all the business people start spending their money to go serve in Southeast Asia? It's a conundrum. And I think certainly in our next conversation, I'd like us to explore what can we do about that? How can we help the church? I would say, how do we help the church engage BAM? But how do we help BAMers also engage the church so that we're not divided, we're not in competition?
Yeah, I think we could take a whole podcast on this topic, but I'm a firm believer in what's the term diffusion of innovation. In other words, you look at the bell curve, which we've used in education or business for a long time. You have change usually happens through a few early adopters who get it. Like, to go back when I was a kid, when we had these old crank adding machines, and pretty soon along came this little electronic calculator. Why do we need one of those? And they were very expensive. Today they're $5 in Walmart. And who bought one? The young people, the people who wanted something new, and they saw it. And the laggards at the other side of the diffusion of innovation, they took a long time to get one. Look, this iPhone. I loved my BlackBerry. Now I've got this iPhone. Why did I give up the BlackBerry? I was a laggard. I was not an early adopter. I didn't stand in line and pay big money for the thing, but I got one. And that's the way change happens. And Christensen called it disruptive innovation. And that was the way with automobiles. It was the way with computers, the way with education. It's now happening in medical industry. And now let's take that same concept and go to the church. And so I think change is going to happen through business people who understand that they can do more than to pay and to pray. They can play. And you probably invented that term. I'm not sure where it came from. It wasn't me.
I didn't, but I like it.
I've taken so many business people overseas, and they've got so excited that something they know and they can do can be used for the Great Commission purposes and can help people who are in poor countries that need jobs, need to grow their business, can be prosperous and create wealth, like Deuteronomy says, and the business people had a part in that. And it's so exciting to see that happening. And I think in the church, what we can do about it is encourage the business people, get them involved. We work together in TriVenture. You probably explained that before on your podcast, but take people with expertise, get them connected to something that's going to have kingdom results in an unreached area. And to me, as that grows, those men and women are going to come back to their churches and they're going to say, wow, I went on a mission trip that used my skill. And it wasn't just that I gave out tracts or I helped build a cabin or I taught VBS and things of nothing. I'm a financial guru. Okay, I have a little mantra: no mission trips unless it uses the skills you have. In business, there's all kinds of skills that can be used for the kingdom. And I think the change will come that way. I won't see it in my lifetime in a significant way, but I see it in some churches, and I'm happy for that. And I think that God's going to use that as we return to the model of Acts, the book of Acts. And the other thing on what can we do about it, and I think give young people a voice. It's young people today want to see something connected to a person's lifestyle. They want to see social change. They want to see the gospel related to the real world in an integrated way. And in their minds, the missionary world is segmented from life, and the church is their experience that way. And I think young people need to be brought into this in every single church.
I totally agree with you.
And people are going to cringe. They're going to have fear. It's going to be, the money question is certainly going to be a big one, like you've already told us. And so I think what can we do about it? And one thing is to give the 20 and 30-somethings a voice. They're not going to be missionaries like me or going to support missionaries like me, but they can get on board with something that looks far more biblical.
Fascinating to hear you say that. I remember several years ago, I was teaching a perspectives class in Greenville, South Carolina, and I was teaching the chapter on community development, which I always use to bring BAM in. And it's as a way of integrating with the people that you're going to reach. And I remember it was probably 100 people in the class, and had them around tables. And so I asked them, I said, we're talking about the sacred sector dichotomy. and what that was doing, and how Business as Mission was helping to break that down. So at your table, I guess once you come up with it, what does it mean? Do you think it means? And where did it come from? And what do we do about it? Well, the whole room, they're all at their tables and they're talking and gabbing and blabbing and it's noisy. And I see this one table with probably 8 young people. And I say young, they were in their late teens, early 20s, college students. And they were quiet as a mouse. And so I walked over and said, well, why are you guys not talking about it? He said, well, we don't get the question. I said, what do you mean? I mean, let me explain. I said, no, we understand what you asked. We don't get it because we don't view life like that. As Christians, we view life as a whole. And I thought, wow, is that refreshing? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good example of the early adopters and the youth leadership that it can bring to us. I always think about David, King David going out to fight Goliath, and he was a kid. Goliath was a giant. Think about the fear that Saul must have had in entrusting the future of Israel to this kid, because that was the deal, right? If David loses, then the Israelites become the slaves of the Philistines. And of course, he didn't lose. He went out there and he slew the giant. But it's one of those things you look at, that must have been terrifying, trusting the nation to a kid. Yeah. And I think it's similar to this. I mean, it'd be frightening to a lot of elders to have the kids take the lead on this, but I think you're spot on, Larry. I really do. You are right. We could definitely, we'll have to come back and talk about this more. We've gone through a couple of points that and again, for the listener, we just threw out ideas. We just wanted to have a coffee klatch and invite you guys to be a part of it. And we said, well, what are some things we might talk about? Larry and I can talk forever, as you can imagine, but we'll stop here and we will invite you to have coffee with us again at some point in time and we'll call it the Coffee Klatch 1, the Coffee Klatch 2, or some corny title to the episode, but you'll know that it's the follow-on of this conversation. Larry, last word you say to our coffee mates here?
Well, I'm encouraged. I think we spent most of our time looking at kind of the barriers or what's slowing down this reformation of mission. It's Matt calls it, but I'm not discouraged. I think that sometimes change takes a while, and we look back at the Reformation and think it happened overnight. Yeah. No, it didn't. Yeah. It took decades, and so this is going to take some time as well. And I just praise God for everybody who gets it, everybody who sticks their neck out and presents a new idea. But it always must come back to the Scripture and how God. It's God's mission. It's not ours. And the whole concept Missio Dei is what I've tried to study a little bit. In God's admission, He's the one who wants the world to be worshiping Him and following Him. It's His. And let's see how He did it when Jesus came. Let's see how He expresses it in the New Testament. And let's get back to some of the basics. So, I'm encouraged.
I'm with you.
And you're always such an encouraging guy, Mike. You are the master of that. And so let's just keep moving forward.
And we'll have this conversation. We'll take it to the next level at another time. But Larry Sharp, professor, missional guy, business coach with IBEC Ventures, board member at Freedom Business Alliance, and holy Moses. And he said he was retired. He is not. He's never going to happen, brother.
Oh, I just keep trying. I don't golf, and when I fish, I never catch anything. So what am I going to do? Just keep doing what I'm doing.
I tell people, if I love the people I'm doing it with, and I love what I'm doing, why would I ever change? All right, well, we'll stop here, and we'll pick it up later. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for listening to the Business as Mission podcast. We invite you to become part of the story by supporting the BAM podcast at patreon.com/BAM Stories. There's a link in the notes with this episode. For more information, go to thirdpathinitiative.com or tryventure.com. Please share this podcast and give us a review wherever you listen. If you'd like to help with expenses and expansion of the Business as Mission podcast, you can become a donor through Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/BAM Stories. This podcast is brought to you by generous donors and sponsors. You can become one by going to patreon.com/BAM Stories.